World Deaf Federation estimates that 80,000 people in Zimbabwe suffer from hearing impairments. The challenges that deaf people face are manifold. The biggest challenge that deaf people face in integrating into their communities is lack of understanding of deafness. This is exacerbated by various myths about deafness in society. Deaf people are a unique cultural group with an identified culture that is distinct from the communities in which they live. The history of deaf people and their culture make up deaf history. The deaf culture is a culture that is centered on sign language and relationship among one another. Unlike other cultures, the deaf culture is not associated with any native land as it is a global culture. In this documentary, we highlight the different deaf people from all walks of life, how they grew up, accomplishments, challenges, and how they run their day-to-day lives. I grew up hearing, but I got deaf at the age of 9 years. I went to school with hearing students. There was no sign language at school. I was the only deaf student among the students. Learning was very hard. Teachers didn't know how to teach in sign language. So I had to try and read lips of the teachers. So from grade 3 up to Form 4, I was learning with hearing students. Deaf women are often not involved in communities because of lack of sign language. They are not involved in the development as others. Even in meetings, they are not involved. We want both deaf women and hearing women to develop together. We want deaf women to be involved in learning about issues that affect us. The level of sign language in health facilities is very low. Sign language should be included in the nurses' training curriculum so they can help the deaf. We should force the nurses to learn sign language. I personally feel that nurses must learn sign language because it's important for the deaf. Without sign language, it will be hard for the deaf to hear anything. The life of some deaf youths is not good because some neighbors do not try to communicate with them. Even when the deaf may be sick, how can they report the sickness? I think the hearing can learn sign language so that the deaf and the hearing can socialize. If a deaf person is sick or maybe has some issues worrying him or her, then they can report to others. Since many hearing people have not learned to sign, many deaf people are sad and lonely. To solve this, we need hearing people to learn sign language from deaf clubs. Doctors and police can also learn sign language from schools for the deaf. In that way, we can interact. If I am sick, I can ask someone to take me to the hospital. Or if a deaf person is raped, he or she can easily report that rape. How can the person be able to report if no one knows sign language? In Mutare, we have Sanganai Deaf Club. We would like to see more deaf clubs in other centers across Zimbabwe. We want deaf people to be able to come together and socialize. The case of deaf and hearing dating is hard because English is hard for the deaf. It is best for the hearing to learn sign language and deaf culture. A deaf and hearing person may meet and date. The problem may arise with the families involved. It will be important to let the families know. You explain that your partner is deaf and the family may understand. To solve this, people need to learn sign language. Remember that sign language is now in the Zimbabwean constitution. Again, we need people to understand deaf culture. It is important for parents and family to accept and learn and understand deaf culture if their child is deaf. It will be easier for the deaf child to accept and know that he is not different from any other child who is hearing. Society also needs to accept deaf people and learn to value diversity. Parents with deaf children should not abandon their deaf children. The deaf children should be helped to learn sign language. It's their right. They should not abandon their children, but they should be taken to school. Abandoning the kids is not good. Parents must be responsible and ensure the children have sign language. Deaf children are a gift from God too. If the children are given protection and care, they will grow up well. There are challenges, yes, but there are ways for them to grow up well.
Many times, people come to visit us at Nzeve in Mutare. And when they arrive and they see lots and lots of mothers with the children, they ask why. So I want to explain why we have mothers there with the children. Before, we saw that with the deaf children, it's a problem if the deaf child is learning sign language, but they go back home, maybe Kumusha, and there nobody knows sign language. So we saw how important it was to include the mothers with the children.
It is very important to communicate in the home and in the community when you are deaf. This needs to be solved because as deaf people, we need to be able to communicate. Maybe you want to communicate with the landlord about water. It's hard without sign language. Maybe communicating through writing could somehow help. When they consider the deaf and hearing applicants, they always choose the hearing. The reason they cite is that of communication. I would appeal to doctors, police, and employers to learn sign language. This will make communication between the deaf and the hearing easier. Afterwards, I wanted to learn sign language, so I went to Morgenster. I met with other deaf people and I started to learn sign language in 2008. Afterwards, I went for teaching at Morgenster. I went for a diploma in education. Now I teach at Henry Moray School for the Deaf. I teach grade 4.
And in Nzewe we have a program which wants to raise awareness, particularly disability awareness, and our focus is on the rural communities. So here in Manicaland, we are working in the different districts of Manicaland, where we go out there and we meet with the community leadership, which includes the village heads, the CCWs, and the different government volunteers in the rural communities. The rural communities, mainly, they have a traditional leadership, which is mainly focused much on the cultural aspect. And this now, mainly they believe in, disability has to be linked with some spiritual links or some spirits. And this kind of belief is really harmful for children with disabilities. So we then visit the rural communities and try and preach that no. It's not always about spiritual connections when it comes to disability, because our main message is we want to promote early intervention and early access to services proper for the children with disabilities.
Deaf people have achieved a lot despite the many barriers that they face in their communities. More awareness programs are needed so as to ensure that deaf people are fully accepted in their communities. The situation for deaf people in rural areas still remains precarious, and efforts need to be made to ensure that programs reach out to the deaf in rural areas as well.